Hello everyone and welcome to the live stream on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining me live. And if you're watching the recording, thank you for being here. Today, we are talking about how to build a learning culture. Now, as you may know, we collect requests from our viewers and from our learners on the L&D Academy and our Udemy courses about different topics that they might be interested in learning more about. And this honestly has been one of those topics that people do seem to request a lot. So here we are talking about it. Now, if you have an idea about a topic that you would like for us to cover, down in the description, you will find a link where you can submit your ideas. I promise you it only takes a couple minutes. But yeah, let us know what topic should we cover next. And with that being said, a few introductions are in order, I believe. In case you haven't met me before, my name is Irina Ketkin. I am an experienced learning and development consultant with over a decade in the field. The things that I do is mostly design custom personalized learning programs for employees of large multinational organizations. And I also help my clients build roadmaps to success through tailor-made trainings, mostly soft skills, coaching, management and leadership development, and a little bit of team building mixed in there as well. Now, again, I would love to know where you're from, so make sure to head over to the chat. I'm not sure which side of it is, but go to the chat and let me know where you're joining me from. And you know what? Without further ado, let me tell you what you can expect in today's session. Now, first of all, we have 4 tasks in our inbox. The first one is get a working definition of what exactly a learning culture is. Then we'll talk a little bit about why it's important and what's in it for us. And then I'll share with you the 6 building blocks of learning organizations. And finally, we will wrap it up by how do you go about building a learning culture. Now, again, if you have any questions whatsoever, please make sure to either type them in the chat window, but in case you're not signed into YouTube or you don't want to sign into YouTube, which is perfectly fine, then we also have a Slido link. And you can see the link to the Slido in the description to the stream, but there is also a code right here that you see just below me. Feel free to log in and ask away. And yeah, by the way, in case you ask me any one of those really tough questions that I don't have the answer to, what I will do is I'll first of all admit that I don't know it, which again, quite a possibility. I don't know everything, but what I'll do is I'll make sure to go back to the recording of this live stream and in the comment, and I'll make sure to pin it at the top, I'll make sure to get either some research done and answer your question or find someone who actually knows that the answer to that question. So either way, I will make sure to respond. Hey, we have people from West Virginia, from Bulgaria. Hi guys, thank you so much for joining me. I really, really appreciate it. So let's kick things off, right? Let's start with the first order of business. Our very first task on our inbox is to get a working understanding of what a learning culture actually is. And most of the time, if I don't know something, I go to the internet, and I'm sure that's the case for all of us. So if we are to search what is culture, then we will find ultimately 2 definitions. The first one tells us that culture is the ideas, customs, and social behavior of any particular people or society. And the examples of different cultures that we see around the world are numerous. One that immediately comes to mind is Japan, which is very different and has very different customs and traditions than, say, Europe or North America. But even within Europe, we have so many different cultures. We are all hopefully familiar with Spanish siesta, which as a person who lived there for a couple of years, I still miss and I really appreciate. And then we also have Norway, who are super strict on work-life balance. So chances are, if you want to get in touch with anyone from Norway, say Friday afternoon, yeah, that's not going to happen. But anyways, going back to our search, I said we get 2 definitions. So the first one is the one we see right there. The second one tells us that it's a bit more tangible. It's the arts and other manifestations of human intellectual achievement regarded collectively. Now, this definition, and the reason I'm including it, is very interesting, not because of the artistic side of things, but because it makes our definition a little bit more concrete. You see, culture in itself isn't something that you can touch or smell or point to, but the manifestations that come out of culture in the form of actions, that's what tells us what the culture is in a particular group of people. And so now what we need to do is basically bring down this definition to a much smaller scale and look at just an organizational culture. So if we look at kind of a definition for that, it says that basically all values, expectations, practices that guide the actions and decisions of employees in the same organization is what we mean by organizational culture. Now, I'm sure you can all think of your own examples where a company really lived its values through all the actions. One from my experience that always stands up is I used to work for a company that had a very strong and well-defined organizational culture, and one of their values was make it easy. I actually checked recently, they changed those, but at the time when I worked for that company, it was make it easy. And so for them, this meant making it easy for all of their customers, for all of their users to be able to actually use their products, consume their products, understand their products in an easy way. And it didn't mean that on the back end, things were easy. Most of the time they were not, but we wanted to make sure that our users, our customers, have it easy, so to speak. And actually that value lived in practically everything that we did, including learning and development. One thing that we had to do at the time was figure out how come people weren't signing up to training courses. And one of the reasons was because it was very complicated. Like the whole approval process was very complicated. They had to write a business case for why they wanted to attend. Then they had to get approval from their manager, maybe a couple more managers. And then it was just such a lengthy process. And also the training offerings weren't readily available, so to speak. So we had to make some changes and really make it easy for them. And one thing that we actually did is we looked at what systems were being used the most at the time. And for that particular time period, it was Workplace by Facebook. For those of you who don't know what that is, basically Facebook created like a corporate product, a closed social media platform for all the employees within that one particular organization. And so we started creating notices and announcing all upcoming courses on Workplace, and we made it very easy for people to sign up. You know, they could just click on a couple of buttons. They didn't need to request approvals, and so we made it easy for them. It was not easy for us. Let me make that perfectly clear, okay? We had to find a way to make sure all the systems in the back end communicated with each other, which if you work in IT, you know how difficult that is, but we made it easy for the employees. And so, yeah, this is just one example of how an organizational culture can really shine and really guide how we go about day-to-day tasks, responsibilities, meetings, as far as even dress code probably. But anyways, that's about organizational culture. So why are we even talking about this? Well, because we need to understand kind of the high-level concept before we can move on to defining what a learning culture is. And now that we know that, let's take a look at, once again, a couple of definitions. And the first one is a bit on the nose, okay? It says that it's the climate within an organization where people enjoy learning. Again, on the nose, right? Not very descriptive. The second one, however, tells us a little bit more. It says that it's embedding learning into day-to-day practices of an organization, promoting and rewarding learning at different levels. Now, if you look at these two definitions, we see, once again, the intangible definition that we saw earlier about learning culture being about learning, which, again, on the nose. But the truth is that even this word learning is somehow vague, right? Because it can mean different things to different people. For some people, learning means reading a book. For others, it's attending a course. For some of you, watching live streams like these or recordings of live streams like these. And so learning can be different things to different people. And so the organization actually has to step in and define more concretely what are the specific day-to-day actions and behaviors that company expects of its employee to kind of demonstrate every day. And so this is where we arrive at something called the learning organization. Basically, any organization that promotes and celebrates learning, and one in which employees have a lot of different opportunities to learn, that would be called a learning organization. So in reality, we see that learning organizations usually give plenty of opportunities for people to learn. That's one of the things that really distinguishes them. You can have, you can be providing your employees with different, again, trainings, resources, online courses, mobile learning, opportunities to job rotate or shadow someone and observe, or participate in different projects or stretching assignments. So learning can have, again, many different facets here. Another thing that's very curious about learning organizations that we've seen over and over and over again in many different researches was that learning organizations ultimately not just allow people to challenge each other, like for the purpose of finding the best idea, right? But it also encouraging, challenging, and questioning the status quo and any established business practices. Learning organizations are very also supportive of self-reflection, okay? So it's not just about, hey, here's a learning opportunity, but also going back and figuring out, what does this mean? How can you apply it? What are some of the things that you can take away from this experience and actually put it into action? And one thing that is very interesting about learning organizations is that they understand that when they allow, when they support and encourage people to change themselves, to transform themselves, at the end of the day, that is going to have an effect on the overall organizations. And I want to give you a very cheeky example, okay? Let's say that you stay online for the stream until the very end, okay? And you learn a few tips on how you can build a learning culture, a sustained learning culture, and then tomorrow you decide to try them out, okay? So if your company is a learning organization, what you're gonna find is probably a conversation with your manager who asks you, hey, how did it go? What did you learn? What can we try out here? What are some of the things that you took away, and how can you share this knowledge with your colleagues, with your team, with HR if you're part of HR? But non-learning organization would have a very different approach in probably shutting you down the moment you try something new, something that's not part of the current practices. And so they might say, you know what, we've been doing the same thing for 3, 5, 10 years, right? And if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So there is a stark difference between the two. And one of the key questions usually is, well, how can you tell the difference, right? We've been talking about making learning more specific, making it more concrete. And well, this is exactly how you can distinguish between a learning organization and a non-learning one. So in the day-to-day, a learning organization will probably have some dedicated time for learning where employees can attend trainings, conferences, or workshops. They would be able to watch online courses or take up mobile learning, participate or observe different projects, or be part of the different projects. And again, I did mention rotating jobs and observing how others do theirs. Listening to podcasts would also be something that would be on the menu there. For some learning organizations, coaching and mentoring are a huge, huge game changer. And let's not forget about books, right? Reading books, taking some time to read some articles or some research and really understanding what is happening out there in the world. But again, that in itself may not always be enough, because once an employee has gained any kind of knowledge, a learning organization would be encouraging that person to apply what they've learned back on their work, back in their work, to experiment, to find the best processes, to share their learnings with others. Okay, so we've talked a lot about what a learning culture is, what a learning organization is. So I think it's safe to go to our second task, which is why is having a learning culture important? Okay, and so I actually want to take a bit of a pause here, okay, because on the one hand, yes, it is necessary to talk about why it's important to have such a culture. But at the same time, I can't really help but feel like I don't know, it's very obvious, right? It's obvious why any company would want to become a learning organization or to adopt a learning culture. But if you're not convinced, let's just go through the basics here, okay? So on a surface level, we can say that a learning organization supports learning. And we've talked about the importance of learning in our other live streams and videos here on the channel before. By the way, shameless plug, if you haven't subscribed, make sure to hit that subscribe button. But what learning gives us ultimately on a much larger scale comes down to competitive advantage, okay? Let's look at it this way. Today's markets are increasingly uncertain, super fast changing. Something that is trending today will not be trending tomorrow and will be out of fashion by tomorrow. So a lot of companies, especially learning organizations, understood and kind of figured on their own that instead of relying on very concrete knowledge, skills, or insights of their employees, it's a far better strategy to instead help people adapt quickly and learn faster. So when an organization is open to, say, new ideas, allowing experimentation, taking a proactive approach, collaborating with different people who, sometimes may be very different to ourselves, it becomes somewhat easy to adapt by listening to what customers want at that moment, and that's key, and then also very quickly delivering it. It allows information to flow more freely across different departments, avoiding the silo mentality, and ultimately make really well-informed and potentially, most importantly, timely decisions. For anyone who has ever watched a medical TV show, for me that's been a guilty pleasure in the past, but you may have noticed one thing that these shows all have in common. They usually portray some sort of forward-thinking or teaching hospitals, but this actually happens in reality. I know because both of my parents are doctors, and I actually know how this happens in real life. So a lot of these organizations, a lot of these hospitals actually allot some dedicated time to their resident medical professionals to either conduct research or try some sort of experimental procedure. And then regardless of the outcome of that procedure, the results would usually be shared with the wider community so that everyone can learn both from the mistakes and the successes and ultimately build on them. As a matter of fact, almost every modern medical procedure anyways, goes through these iterations until we find the best approach to healing the body. And yes, again, that means that sometimes people will be making mistakes, but if mistakes are not allowed for the fear of repercussions or whatever else may be the case, then in a way, we get stuck doing the same things that yield the same results, and the company will never really progress forward. Think of it this way. Would you rather go to a surgeon who has done 10,000 different surgeries in his career and has over 90% success rate? Or would you go to the one who has 100% success rate but has only ever done one surgery in his life or her life? Again, mistakes are okay as long as we learn from them. I probably can talk for hours about the many mistakes that I've done. I have picked the wrong energizers, the wrong icebergs, the wrong approaches to different training topics. And again, that is part of the process. At the end of the day, some mistakes you can only learn the hard way. Certain activities will not work, but you will only find that out as you're doing them. So again, I hope that this is enough to convince you that learning organizations are and definitely should be a big deal. But if you aren't, let me know in the comments, let me know in chat, and I'd be happy to talk more about this. With that being said, I personally think that we can totally move on with the third task in our inbox today, and those are the 6 building blocks of learning organizations. Now, I do want to preface this with a very quick note. There are many authors out there who have some wonderful frameworks around this, and in the coming weeks, we'll be sharing some of their models on our social media channel. So if you're not following us, again, now's a good time. But the 6 building blocks that I want to share with you today actually came from my own experience with this matter. You know, I've worked on a couple of these projects. Some of these have been more successful than others, and some of the principles that I'm going to share with you, may completely strike home for you, or they might be a complete miss for, again, your context and your organization. But either way, I do strongly believe that these are the fundamentals of any learning organization, okay? So let's dive in. The first building block is that learning organizations support personal mastery. One of the key human drivers is to become really good at what you like to do, okay? And yes, most of the time people say this about our hobbies, but the truth is that a lot of people actually apply this in their day-to-day at work as well. We want to be seen as experts, okay? We want to feel proud, and we want to feel accomplished, and we want to be the go-to person for a specific topic. And again, this can be motivating to a lot of people and inspire them to create change, which is, again, one of the motivators of a learning organization. Let's use an example, okay? Let's say that, I'm gonna assume that everyone on the stream here today is some sort of a learning and development professional. And let's say that in a few years, you have an aspiration to become the head of the L&D department. Now, a learning organization would not just encourage you to do this and to pursue this aspiration, but also support you professionally, emotionally, even financially, by sponsoring perhaps some kind of a program for you or certificate for you. So this is what would what would happen if you had that aspiration in a learning organization. And by the way, I will be using pretty much the same example to kind of show you what it would look like in real world for the remaining blocks. So let's talk about the second one. And the second one is that a learning organization creates on-the-job learning opportunities for all employees. Now, this is a pretty straightforward one. In a learning organization, all employees have access to learning, and what's more, they are encouraged to apply it back on their job. If we go back to our example with you wanting to become the head of L&D, this means that the company, probably in the face of your manager, would look and present you and provide you with different opportunities for you to learn new things, okay? Maybe they will invite you to a top management meeting. Maybe they will ask you to lead a project all by yourself or be part of the project management team. Maybe, again, they will sponsor some kind of a certification program for you. And all of this is not only for you to grow and to become really good professional and expert in your field, but the organization would actually benefit from this because you will be bringing in new knowledge, you will be bringing in best practices from around the world, so the company should ideally allow you to apply those on the job. Now, the third building block is to empower people to make decisions by challenging the status quo. There is a really famous saying by Steve Jobs, which I absolutely love. He said, supposedly, it doesn't make sense to hire smart people and tell them what to do. We should hire smart people so they can tell us what to do. And I absolutely love this quote because to me, that's the kind of embodiment of this building block. If you help your people to become smart, if you then send them to courses, sponsor them, allow them to grow, allow them to get some stretching assignments, to participate in different projects, to read books and so on. And then you turn around and you rob them of the opportunity to challenge you, to challenge the organization, to challenge all the established practices. That company is doomed. You'll be taking away its power to change. You'll be taking its power to adapt, to innovate, to outrun the competition, which at the end of the day, we said is kind of the main driver of having a learning culture. Empowerment, however, has a slightly different dimension to it as well, and it's about supporting the culture of asking the question, why? Why do we do this? Why is this important? Why hasn't anyone tried anything else yet, right? When people learn, they feel motivated to do more and to try new things. And this can only be helpful if that person completely understands what impact their growth has, both on their work and the organization as a whole. And again, going back to our example from wanting to become a head of L&D, if your manager or the HR director doesn't actually allow you to try new things, doesn't allow you to change things up, makes it difficult to challenge the established practices and the status quo, how can you truly implement new systems and processes or policies that would benefit everyone within the organization and probably without? That leads us to the fourth building block of a learning organization. So I believe that learning organizations encourage collaboration, feedback, and knowledge sharing. Now, the truth is, and we have seen this over the ages, we learn a great deal from each other when we talk to each other, when we ask questions, when we learn from other people's experiences, and feedback plays a key role in this because it's ultimately the best opportunity to improve ourselves, right? If we do something well, it'd be great to know about it so we can repeat it in the future. And if we suck at something, the sooner we know, the sooner we can fix it and change it up. Again, if we use our example of becoming the head or the manager or director of L&D, whatever it may be called in your organization, we need to be able to manage people and to build strong teams. We need to be able to grow our network, to have a more strategic overview of how learning fits in the overall company strategy. And for that to happen, yes, of course you can sign up to a training, do an online course, read a book, but it won't matter if you're not asked to apply what you're learning back on the job and not given any feedback. And specifically when it comes to knowledge sharing, I always go back to this really popular quote, tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, but if you involve me, I will learn. I kind of want to change it up a bit. Let me teach you and I will learn. And so this is ultimately what knowledge sharing is all about. And it is a double win, okay? Just like this stream. I know quite a lot about building learning cultures. And again, I've done it in the past. But when I had to sit down and prepare for today, I actually learned a couple of new things and it helped me systematize my thinking. Not to mention that all the questions which hopefully will be coming up either in chat or in the Slido will probably be very useful as well. I get to look at things from a different perspective. You get to hear my thoughts on it. And so we get to exchange worldviews. And if you only watch the stream, right, but then don't discuss it with your colleagues, chances are you may forget all about it. So I actually do encourage you, I do challenge you to talk to your peers about what you've learned here today. And because I know that every once in a while we happen to be the lone wolf, the lone warrior when it comes to L&D, being the single person responsible for all things learning, then I will be your peer. Just type in the comments below, what have you learned today and how you can apply it, and I'd be happy to go back and forth and kind of help you polish that up. Okay, so that's the fourth building principle. Let's go back to number 5, and that is to inspire active experimentation and learning from mistakes quickly. I talked about mistakes, so I'm not going to repeat myself too much, but imagine that you're working on a new project, okay? An important project, maybe for a new department or for a very senior executive in your company. So you can kind of do one of two things. You can either work on it for weeks, polish every last detail, and then present it to the client or whoever the end user is. That's option number one. And then option number two is to get a rough draft to that client or user, ask for their feedback, polish up the draft, ask for feedback again, and you repeat this until the final product is just what the client needed. So if you're a perfectionist, the second option right now probably sounds like torture, and I'm sorry about that. But the truth is that the quicker you can make some mistakes, the quicker you can learn from them and move on with your work and ultimately get some really good progress on your project. Making room for mistakes lets us collect intelligent information so that we can improve while still making progress on our work. And it's important to remember that we all make mistakes, and it is okay, as long as we learn from them and we never repeat the same mistake twice. A learning organization not only allows but encourages mistakes, as opposed to perfecting, say, months or year-long projects only for them to fail when they first encounter the client or the end user. I really love, there is this popular anecdote, and if you've heard it in the past, let me know in the chat, but there's this popular anecdote about someone who was hired into this very large company, and they made a huge mistake, okay? They lost millions for the company. And so someone asked the CEO, how come you didn't fire them? And the CEO's response was, why would I fire that person? They just learned $1 million lesson. You can't teach that in a training room. And I absolutely love that story because at the end of the day, that is the value of mistakes in a very simple sentence. It's just one of those things that you can't learn otherwise. And that leads us to the final building block. And it says that all organizational systems and practices should facilitate learning. A culture of learning cannot thrive without the right environment. If there are no policies, if there are no systems, if there are no procedures in place that actually support learning initiatives, there won't be a tangible shift in the mindset. One thing that always comes to mind when I talk about this specific building block are career paths, right? If you're not familiar with those, basically, a company usually has like a very clear, very transparent career path, which essentially tells you if you want to become XYZ or ABC, if you want to move to that department, or if you want to get this role, then you need to do 1, 2, 3. So that's, again, a very, very oversimplified definition of what a career path is. But if a company doesn't have clear and transparent career paths, that can actually leave a lot of people wondering, well, what's the point of having access to, say, all of these different learning opportunities if there is no end goal to them? And yes, I agree that learning in itself should be an end goal, but that's not how adults learn. And by the way, we do have a video on the key adult learning principles on our YouTube channel, so make sure to check it out to learn why that's not gonna work. So learning has to have applicability back on the job. I'm not really sure if that's a word, but yeah, I hope you know what I mean. So yeah, these are the 6 building blocks of a learning organization. How does your organization stack up against these 6 building blocks? I'm very curious to get your thoughts on this. Take a look at these here. And kind of do a very quick assessment, just kind of really yes, no. How many of these are present in your workplace? Let me know in the chat, let me know in the comments below. What's the number between 1 to 6? How many yeses did you get? Very curious to hear from you guys. But anyways, I am going to wrap it up because this is ultimately what learning organizations or a learning culture should look like. And you can do a very quick assessment just based on these 6 building blocks. And that leads us to the final task of our session today. Basically, we need to figure out how to build one. How do you go about building a learning culture. And let's say that our 6 building blocks are the target, right? The desired outcome, the end result that we're looking for. So at the end of the day, they're really just 3 steps to building a culture like this. And it all starts with evaluating the current learning environment. Before you can plan the route, before you need to find the best way to get from point A to point B, you actually need to figure out what is point A, what is your starting point. And there are many ways that you can do this. You can leverage any existing data within your organization, like maybe you have engagement surveys, or even better, a cultural survey, exit surveys, performance levels. All of these things are super useful when it comes to figuring out what is happening right now. But another thing that you can do, and I definitely encourage you to do, is to actually ask, okay? Do some interviews, do a couple of focus groups from around the organization, send a questionnaire to understand what is the current learning environment. Maybe use those 6 building blocks, maybe use another framework altogether, which is perfectly fine. And that in itself should give you enough data to compare, again, your current environment to the either 6 building blocks or whatever else in terms of framework you want to use. Now, it is important, and I do want to mention here, that this should always be your first step, because you will never be working with a blank canvas, okay? There will always be ridges. Sometimes the paint is going to be thicker or thinner. You need to understand what that starting canvas is so that you can maneuver and build a more sustainable shift towards learning. If you think that your company doesn't have a culture, I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but you're wrong. There is a culture. If it's not well defined, that's a whole different issue. But there is a culture, and then your goal at this point would be to figure out what it is. And one thing to make sure that you're asking is what motivates your learners and what engages them with learning, because that will make it so much easier to then actually figure out what's the best path. Once you've collected all the information, once you understand what your starting point is, you can actually find the easiest route to get to your destination. And ultimately, that brings us to step number 2, which is to design and implement appropriate interventions. Anything you decide you need to implement to support learning, again, you can look at the 6 building blocks, or you can look at another framework altogether, but make sure that at the end of the day, you are providing some learning opportunities, that you are encouraging people to share feedback, that you're allowing for experimentation and making mistakes, that you have some kind of platform where people can share their knowledge, to collaborate. What systems need to be put in place? That is another great question to ask. That would help you. What kind of communication channels you should use? Again, another great question to ask at this point. But there are a lot of things to consider in the design. One of the biggest challenges here is ultimately quantifying what a learning culture should be. So if we say that you should be providing learning opportunities, well, how many is good enough, or how many is too little, or how many is too much? Also, how often should, for example, managers provide feedback? And vice versa, how many or how often should employees provide feedback to their managers? What kind of experiments, what kind of mistakes are allowed? Because, you know, if we go back to this example that I shared about hospitals earlier, hospitals don't want patients to die, right? Your company probably doesn't want to be losing millions of dollars. So you should still have some kind of system, some kind of boundaries in place to let them know, hey, you're welcome to make mistakes, as many as you want. The faster, the better, but kind of keep it in these boundaries. And again, the point of this stage is to build on what you've learned in the previous steps. Again, some examples of things that could count as learning opportunities, apart from everything that I've shared with you so far, is probably being involved in some kind of tough projects or tough conversations even, because we do get to learn a lot if we're involved in difficult conversations. Any sort of team well-being initiatives would also fall in here in kind of this realm. Learning beyond employees' roles. Delegation is huge, huge, huge. And again, all the things that we mentioned earlier, starting with kind of the most famous one in terms of training, but then all the way to more obscure one like job shadowing, secondments, and so on. And then finally, and I would probably say most importantly, you need to monitor the perception and attitudes. The truth is that culture is dynamic, it's alive. You need to make sure that you're continuously monitoring the perception and attitudes of everyone involved. Anytime you notice a shift, you need to clearly understand what is causing it and how can you either sustain it or course correct it. A learning organization should not be seen as a destination in itself. It should be, in a way, a state of being, a journey which continuously unfolds both within the organization but also with the people within it. And so that brings us to the end of our inbox tasks, really. We got a working definition of what a learning culture is. We understood why it's important. And again, if you don't agree or if you're still not clear, let me know in the chat. The 6 building blocks of a learning organization. And I also shared how you can build a learning culture. Now, it is time for your questions. So I'm very quickly going to check first the comments. So we have, are we allowed to ask questions? Oops, I just asked one. Yes, you are. You are encouraged. I actually want to hear all of your questions. And again, if you cannot type in YouTube for whatever reason, feel free to go to the Slido. The code is right here. I believe I'm pointing to the right direction, hopefully. So let me quickly check the Slido over here. And I'm gonna go question to question. So we have the first one here, which says, what would be your advice if colleagues do not like to have a deadline of course completion? They like to learn without a deadline. So it's not related to our topic at hand, but I still feel like it's a good question. I know it's going to be on the nose, but my answer in this case is just let them complete courses without a deadline, okay? One thing that you need to understand is that adults, especially when it comes to adults, they need to know what is the end goal, okay? Giving them a deadline isn't going to speed things up. You actually need to give them a very specific reason as to why they should be completing that course. You need to give them all the benefits, what's in it for them, the with them, so to speak. Another thing that would probably be very beneficial in this case is to actually make sure to relate the course content to what they're doing in their day-to-day in a way to kind of really make sure that what they're learning is finding its way in terms of ideas to implement or in terms of things that they can do back on the job. So again, hopefully that answers your question, but if not, feel free to comment down below and I'm happy to get back to you. So I'm gonna mark this question as complete and I'm gonna move on to the next one. How to create an atmosphere of learning when people are constantly fearful of being let go because of the recession. Oof, that is just such a good question. I don't know if I have the complete answer in this case, but I probably borrow from the answer to the previous question as well. Again, when it comes to adults, they need to know what's in it for them. They need to know that what they're learning will find a way back to their job, will in some way help them, speed things up, make them more efficient, more proficient, more profitable, why not? And so if people are, there's so many factors though here that kind of play into this situation because, and I hate using such a simple model, but if we go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you remember, there was this pyramid that said you basically need to cover all your basics before you can move on to, so to speak, higher levels. And at the very bottom, we have the physical needs and then we have the safety and security. So that's the second level. And when it comes to recession, I think people are fearful of kind of not being to secure those two levels. So it's going to be very difficult to, not impossible, but very difficult to help them reach those next levels, including, you know, belonging, self-esteem, self-actualization, which is where learning ultimately lives, at kind of the highest level of Maslow's pyramid. And again, I do apologize for using such a simplistic model, but it's still valid, believe it or not, even if it's too simplistic. For anyone going through such an experience, I am sorry. I feel for you. I feel like everyone will feel this recession sooner or later. But I do think that there are still things that you as L&D can do. So hopefully that answers your question. But again, if that's not the case, please feel free to comment down below in the video and I will get back to you. All right, let's move on to the next one. What's the difference between organizational culture and learning culture? Okay, so I was a bit preemptive in answering this question, but yeah, organizational culture basically describes all the values and everything, all the practices that are happening within that one particular organization, whereas a learning culture kind of focuses mostly on learning. So that's the difference, and I'm gonna mark this as complete. And let's move on to our final one. What role does the maturity model play into building a learning culture? So I received this question earlier today when I was preparing for the live stream, and I have to be honest, I had heard of the maturity model, the one by Berzin, but I wasn't familiar with the details. And then I did some research, and this is actually what I want to share with you over here. Oh, there we go. Let's get rid of all these pop-ups. So I found this article by Leading Learning, and they're talking about the learning business maturity model. I wonder, can I? Yes, I can zoom in. And it was very interesting read to me, and I will make sure to link this article in the description. But basically they're saying every company goes through these 4 stages, going from static to reactive to proactive to innovative. But what I found really interesting is they actually use a slightly different framework when it comes to what are the things that you need to be paying attention to when it comes to a learning culture. So they have it over here, the 5 domains: leadership, strategy, capacity, portfolio, and marketing. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time because I personally am not super familiar with this. I only found this today, but I will make sure to link this article to either the description or the first comment after the live stream so you can learn more about this. Okay, so these are all the questions that we got from Slido as far as I can tell. And I see that I have a question in the chat, so let me read it out loud. Is it a good idea to learn working on authoring tools like Adobe Captivate yourself? We had the e-learning modules developed by a vendor in my previous organizations, but my current boss wants me to learn those tools myself. So as a learning and development practitioner, you are not always going to be required to do those things. But my personal experience is that it will always be helpful. It will always be helpful to, if not know all the intricacies, then definitely know the basics. So in that case, I'd probably support your boss in saying, yeah, learn the basics. Again, if you're using a vendor who is doing all the creation and creating all the content around it, that's great. But I personally would definitely advise it. I myself am not a huge expert on e-learning. I have done probably about 20 different courses over the years, over the last 10 years. Can I do better? Absolutely. When you have no one else to do it, will my skill level be good enough? You betcha. So yeah, I'm on your boss's side there. I don't see any other questions coming in, which I think means we can wrap it up. So thank you guys so much for joining the session. You have been such an amazing audience. I will be doing more live streams in the future, so if that sounds like a fun thing to watch and to spend some time with me, then make sure to subscribe to the L&D Academy's channel. If you have an idea about a topic that I should cover next, again, in the description down below, there is a link to an anonymous survey that you can fill in and let me know what challenges you're facing, or what topics are on your mind and would benefit learning more about. Now, for everyone who stuck till the very end with me, I actually have a surprise for you, because to all of our viewers on these live streams, we actually offer a 10% discount for our flagship course, Introduction to Learning and Development. The link to the course is in the description, and the promo code that you can use for 10% off is livestream. No spaces, not case sensitive. Make sure to check it out. If you enjoyed this live stream and would like to see more like it, please consider liking and subscribing to the L&D Academy's channel. Good luck, everyone, and I hope to see you around soon.